How would you react to a death sentence? Would you do anything in your power to survive? In 1915, a young Wenseslao Moguel was arrested by the army and accused of being a rebel soldier in the Mexican Revolution. They accused him of being under the orders of the feared revolutionary general Pancho Villa. Without a trial, he was sentenced to death and immediately dragged before a firing squad. The 8 soldiers fired their guns and young Wenceslao fell to the ground, bleeding from several bullets to the head. Once an official fired a kill shot to make sure he was dead, the soldiers left. But 15 years later, Wenceslao Moguel was found alive in the United States. How long did he need to play dead before he could safely escape? Well, stay tuned because, surprisingly, Moguel's not the only person to ever survive a death sentence. Today, we've collected the most unbelievable survival stories from death row. Some of these people were even forced to face death 2 times.
The defendant is hereby sentenced to death. May God have mercy on your soul, Mr.
Number 5. Doyle Hamm. Okay, I need to warn you, this following story is not easy to hear. In 1987, Doyle Lee Hamm was arrested for the murder of a motel employee in Alabama. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. He sat on death row for more than 30 years before his execution day finally arrived in 2018.
Attorneys for Doyle Hamm have made multiple attempts to stop the execution. They're claiming because of cancer treatments, his veins are damaged. A judge ruled he can't be executed by using veins in his legs.
His lawyer tried to get the lethal injection canceled because Doyle had been diagnosed with an aggressive cancer and was fighting other health conditions that would make a proper execution impossible.
We're dealing with someone who's got lymphatic cancer and who's pretty much at the end of his life.
Doyle was examined by an anesthesiologist who concluded that the state was not equipped to carry out the procedure humanely. His lawyer argued that Doyle's cancer, long history of drug abuse, and hepatitis C would turn his execution into a carnival of blood and inhuman suffering.
How much pain does the cancer cause you right now?
The lacerations on my face, it's a burning or stinging little sensation all the time, giving me problems.
Despite this, authorities decided to go ahead with the execution. After spending nearly 3 hours puncturing Doyle's body to try and find a vein and insert the intravenous line that should kill him, the authorities had to call off the execution just before midnight when the death warrant would have expired. Doyle escaped death that day, but while searching for his veins, state personnel punctured his bladder and one of his arteries. After the failed attempt, his lawyer reached an agreement with the authorities to avoid execution and let Hamm remain on in prison until his death, which occurred 4 years later. Number 4. Willie Francis. How did a 17-year-old survive the infamous electric chair? It's the strange story of the execution of Willie Francis in 1946. This black teenager accused of killing a pharmacist in Louisiana was sentenced to death by electrocution after just a 15-minute deliberation by a jury composed exclusively of white men. On the day of the execution, he received his last rites and was strapped into the electric chair. After minutes of excruciating suffering, as the 150-kilogram machine began to shake, Francis desperately screamed, "I'm not dying," and prison guards needed to stop the procedure. An investigation found that the guard in charge of setting up the electric chair had been drunk on the job, and faulty wiring caused the chair to malfunction, torturing Francis needlessly. Despite his appeal all the way to the Supreme Court, the teenager was executed the following year. Number 3. Ray Krone. In 1991, tragedy struck in Phoenix, Arizona. A 36-year-old woman was found dead at the bar where she worked. She had been stabbed to death, but the only evidence found by investigators were bite marks and saliva on her body. Testimony from one of her friends claimed that a 45-year-old man named Krone had offered to help her close the bar that night. Krone was charged with the murder and sentenced to death, despite the fact that there were doubts about the symmetry of his bite shape and the bite found on the victim's body.
And I told that judge, you got the wrong person, I didn't do it. At which point I was called an unremorseful killer, a monster, and said I was sentenced you to death.
He waited years on death row until authorities finally performed a DNA test and discovered the real murderer was a man convicted of another crime. Krone was released in 2002 after waiting almost 10 years in prison to be killed. Number 2. Martin Gurule. This 29-year-old man managed to do something no one had accomplished since the days of the infamous Bonnie and Clyde gang: escape death row in Texas. In 1993, Martin Gurule was convicted of killing 2 people during a restaurant robbery and was sentenced to death. After spending 6 years on death row, he decided it was time to escape. He planned the escape with 6 other inmates. That night, he put on a thick layer of clothing and armor-like wrappings. When the escape was discovered in progress, guards started shooting. The other inmates were caught, but Gurule managed to climb 2 barbed wire fences and escape both the prison and his death sentence. Ironically, he was found a week after his escape, dead under a bridge. Number 1. Wenseslao Moguel. Okay, remember the young Mexican rebel sentenced to death and executed by a firing squad during the Mexican Revolution? Well, he was shot 9 times in the head and body, and according to protocol, an army officer gave him a kill shot to the head. Yet, he survived. After his execution, he wasn't sure whether he was dead or alive, but despite unbearable pain, he managed to hold his breath until his executioners left him to die. Wenseslao Moguel received most of the execution gunshots to his face and was disfigured by the bullets. His story became public after he immigrated to the United States and attracted the attention of the famous Robert Ripley, who invited him on his radio show to share his experience. Wenseslao Moguel died in 1976, over 60 years after being sentenced to death and executed. In the end, it looks like death can sometimes be fooled. Unfortunately, death row isn't the only way to die in prison. Some prisons are so dangerous that they themselves can be worse than a death sentence. Want to know which is the most dangerous prison in the world? Well, here you go. Just keep watching How to Survive.